You're listening to Radio Primavera Sound, proudly presented by Cupra.
Welcome to Line Noise. My guest this week is the Australian-Icelandic musician, composer, record producer, sound designer and director Ben Frost. We spoke about his excellent new album Scope Neglect, which is released in March. We also talked about making shit music and why he won't do it. Kurt Cobain's poetry. We talked about Silence, Metallica's Black Album. And because I absolutely definitely couldn't resist, we talked about Dark. He is a very thoughtful, interesting person, and I hope you enjoy it.
Well, it's good to speak to you today.
You too, mate.
I was listening to Scope Neglect just this morning, and I was really enjoying it, but it made me a bit nervous, I've got to say. And your rat story has not helped. So. I think one of the reasons it makes me a bit nervous is the vast gaps between like musical explosions. You know, there's like a big guitar part, and you think, right, this has started, and then you've got to wait for like another 5 seconds or whatever. What's the idea to make people nervous? I mean, is that like a response you expected?
I wouldn't say I'm setting out to make anyone nervous. That's definitely not my intent. I understand that reaction. But I think that the more interesting question for me is, where does that nervousness come from? And I think it's like, it speaks more to the predictability of music than it does specifically to the randomness of mine, you know? I think there is a kind of a big part of this record, a big part of music for me generally, but specifically this record is about, taking some of these familiar ideas and kind of trying to break them down and sort of parse them a little bit and reconfigure things in such a way that maybe the familiarity is only sort of equaled by the confrontational nature of negative space, like around those familiar objects, and specifically, in regards to the guitar, I guess.
I believe when you created the album, at times you created like entire orchestrations and then you just took them out, basically.
Yeah.
And I wondered if that was sort of part of this, like, the orchestrations would have been more normal. Normal is obviously a big word, but I think you know what I mean. And now they're not there. It's almost like the listener misses something, even if you've never heard it, if that makes any kind of sense.
Well, I guess the thing I would say to that is that, when you have this thing of like, if you've ever been to a theater production or any kind of stage production where there's an error on stage, or maybe you've been to one of my shows where there's an error of some kind and the power cuts out, or the whatever, and there's a silence, right? But then you also can go and see like a Stravinsky concert and listen to the Rite of Spring, and in certain movements there is silence there as well, or there's the silence of a John Cage piece, I guess, is the sort of the penultimate there. But my point is those silences are not the same. One of those is an error. It's a void. It's a kind of an emptiness that is maybe, I suppose, devoid of intent. And then there's a different kind of silence, a theatrical silence, and they operate in a different way, and they feel different. And what I think I was sort of playing around with here was this idea that the kind of architecture that the guitars specifically are sort of navigating around, there is an intention there, and there's an awareness of a kind of there's an awareness of a shape, and I think that changes the way that we listen to that space. like the space feels different when there's an awareness of intention in those spaces. And and the more I sort of like pulled things away from from there, like I knew, like what Greg and sort of Liam was leaning into. I think you can still feel that in those gaps, and so it changes the dynamic of it, and it has a pregnancy to it, and a sort of there's an energy in it, which I find kind of thrilling, honestly.
It's interesting you mentioned the Rites of Spring. I mean, famously, when it opened, people rioted. Well, that's the story anyway.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about necessarily a riot, but how would you, that kind of extreme negative reaction, how would you feel if somebody reacted to your new album like that? If someone was like, no, I can't listen to this. I can't handle it.
I've always taken the position that I can't control how people are going to react to what I do, and I guess that's part of the job of making it's part of the job of being an artist is taking risks and risking in part a negative reaction to what I'm doing. I guess the only thing that really would bother me in that situation is that there's perhaps like a misinterpretation of the intent, and to your point before, like I would hate to. A thing that would maybe bother me would be somebody sort of going, okay, this music has just been designed to scare me, like, and that is definitely not my intention at all, because that's not how I feel about it. I didn't design it that way for myself. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what your intention was.
That's the big question, isn't it?
Actually, that sounds really rude. I don't mean that in any.
No, not at all. It is the question, right? I mean, I guess the real answer is the intention is to keep kind of pushing the envelope of where my sort of I suppose what feels normal to me is different to that of my audience. There is a void there in a sense, in that and I see kind of a big part of what I do as I don't want to put things into the world just for the sake of it. I don't want to kind of make records that are just there for making content. To me, I'm still of maybe the tail end of or the beginning of a tail end of a generation of musicians who the album as a concept still really means a lot to me. This idea of a body of work, and there's a cyclical nature to the way I work, wherein I if you take my film scores out of the equation, I mean, this is the first record I've done since when was it, 2017?
Yeah, it's 7 years.
It's a while. We're talking. I mean, it's like we're bordering on sort of Portishead, like levels of silence. And I think the older I get, the more I understand that. I've been really privileged to to have a sort of a fairly long-standing relationship friendship with Jeff Barrow at this point in time, and I've asked him about that on a number of occasions, and it just like this feeling that there's just less and less that needs to be done, I suppose. I understand that more and more now. Like, because I think when you do turn the mirror back in on yourself and sort of go, okay, well, what is it I want to do now? Like, there's the questions become bigger and the challenge becomes more. Like, it becomes harder to kind of like raise the bar. And
you mentioned soundtrack work.
yeah.
I wondered if that had, in a way, influenced your use of space and silence, because that's, I think, a good soundtrack definitely makes good use of those properties.
Mm. Again, I mean, there's a different kind of negative space there, because, you know, when you're talking about a score, a proper soundtrack, you know, it's inevitably it's a counterpart to another idea, another narrative. It's a counterpart to a bigger narrative, and so the implied silence in film music is making room for the film. You know, it's dancing around dialogue. It's dancing around, you know, all the other kind of elements of the filmmaking. And I suppose, in some ways, I consider this record, and, you know, by extension, maybe all the other records I've tried to make, very much a sort of the antithesis of that idea in some ways. I really, yeah, I would really like to think they're different, and I would go even further to say that, like, you know, getting a huge part of this record as a process was really about writing myself out of that headspace. Like, it's like, you know, it's like a detox. You know, like it's writing film music is dangerous. You know, it's a dangerous job for somebody who also wants to write music in and of itself. You know, I remember talking with Johan about this, you know, years ago before he died. You know, this idea that you know, the more you kind of immerse yourself in that world, the more you lean into that. You lean into this kind of like this narrative crutch of the impetus to write music is driven by what's in front of you, you know, by the story that you're responding to. You know, it's a far scarier and more daunting task to just to kind of write music out of you know, the ether, so to speak.
Yeah, the fear of the blank page, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I filled in the blank pages a lot, like, but it was all shit. It was all complete shit for like, I mean, honestly, like a couple of years. I mean, like, and it coincided with COVID, and that was also a really rough time for me. Like, I know a lot of artists, a lot of friends of mine who really reveled in that period. They really reveled in that sort of the introspection and the non, you know, the non-movement. But for me, it was a disaster, because I didn't realize it before then, of course. You know, if you'd asked me before that period, I probably would have, you know, romanticized that idea. Of course, I would love to sit at home for 18 months in my pajamas and just write music. Like it sounds good, you know. But for me, it was a disaster. I realized very quickly that a big part of my process was the kind of kinetic energy of moving and being in different spaces and kind of taking an idea and moving it through different, you know, kind of situations as a way of kind of isolating it from its, you know, from the source, and sort of looking at it from different angles and talking to different people about it, and, you know, and so, yeah, like everything that kind of came out of that period was was rubbish. And
I think it's interesting because some musicians, I believe in COVID, and I think in general, used making music as a tool to sort of feel better about themselves. And it didn't really matter to them if it was good music or not. It was just, I'm going to make something, maybe something ambient, and I'll enjoy doing it. Doesn't matter if it's good. Is that something you can personally do? Can you be happy just making something that's okay, for the process, and maybe never releasing it? In fact, probably never releasing it.
well, I did do that for sure, and I think that in the moment, that's definitely how some of that felt. I think the problem is that it was, for me, it was imbued with exactly that feeling of this sort of, I don't know. It felt kind of in sort of looking back at it, afterwards, it felt static and sort of, Prozac, for use of a better word, and so like the idea of like, okay, well, is that what I really want to get behind? Is that what I want to take with me moving forward? It was like a resounding fuck no. Like that is not, that's not something I want to extend into my waking life. But no, I do understand that. I totally respect it. I mean, I think there are musicians who really do that incredibly well. This idea of I think there's something also in the discipline of going into the studio every day and working in spite of not wanting to. That's never really worked for me. Like Alessandro Cortini is but the person that comes to mind immediately. I mean, the guy is just he's a machine. Like going into the studio every day and just working and making things and not really questioning their value, like just doing it and then putting it aside and moving on to the next thing. There's a Japanese musician whose name I'm going to completely destroy, so I won't try, but he, I'm sure you could Google him, but he makes an album every day.
Wow.
Releases an album every day. And this has been going on for a couple of years now. I mean, everybody's different, I guess, is the point.
One very notable feature on Scope Neglect are the guitars from Greg Kubacki. And you also worked with Liam Andrews, who's a bass player. Greg is from Carbon, who are a prog metal band. Are you a big metal fan?
Yeah, absolutely. Always have been.
What do you like in metal?
I think that there's, like all genres, metal carries a lot of baggage with it, and there are certain tropes of the genre, which I find hard to kind of move past, specifically the vocal stuff, the vocal delivery, especially in like progressive metal. But I think once you sort of move beyond that and start to actually like get inside the music and look at what's really going on there, I suppose there's a kind of an economy. There's a sort of a very economic way of working with sound that I kind of find fascinating. It is a very limited palette. So it is by definition there's a certain minimalism there. One or two guitars, a bass player, a drummer, and then there's the mechanics of metal. Like when I think about a band like Carbon or Meshuggah, Another Swedish band who I worked with many years ago now, called Crowpath, which is a slightly different sound, but definitely sort of coming from the same space of this sort of the mechanics of the music. It's almost sort of mathematical approach to tempo and melody and harmony and and time. There's a sort of a ferocity to it that is really fascinating to me, and there's a sort of a sort of athleticism almost to the way it works that I find kind of fascinating, in the same way that I find maths fascinating. I'm really bad at it myself, but there's a beauty in it that I'm really drawn to. And so in kind of approaching Greg to come and work with me on the record, we'd never met before, and I reached out to him and just sort of said, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Do you want to come and try some stuff with me? And he was really open to the idea, and of course once we met and started talking, it became very obvious very quickly that he's a massive electronic music fan, and the way that Autechre, Aphex Twin, he's a big kind of Warp label fanatic. And of course, once you know that, and then you go back and you listen to Car Bomb again, it's like, of course he is. Of course, it's all there. This kind of this fascination with the sort of asymmetry within rhythm specifically, and just the all the kind of arpeggiation and sort of breaking apart of chords. I mean, that's how he's kind of thinking about music, is in the same way as something like Incunabula or whatever from Autechre. And so we quickly sort of had a dialogue through that sort of, I don't know, there's a bridge there. And then with Liam, I mean, My Disco is the band I always wanted to be in, and the fact that they're from my hometown, and that we're friends, I mean, that was kind of an added bonus. But I mean, irrespective of that, they are hands down one of the best bands working today. I mean, it's the kind of band I always dreamed of being a part of. They have and watching them kind of evolve over the past 10 years from a sort of a, I don't know, something that really was coming from that sort of post-shellac sort of math rock Albini kind of world, minimalist drum bass guitar thing, and sort of developing almost into this sort of I don't know, it's more like a collective now. They're really making music that is, it's highly deconstructed and very sort of album centered, and the way that the music works on stage is not the way that it works on the record, and there's a the sort of the dissolving of egos, like if it doesn't need bass, then they just don't put bass on it. And I love that. I love that about them, and I love that they just keep pushing the envelope, and every album feels new and different. And so with Liam, we've been talking for years about trying to do something together, and I just knew that he was the right person to talk to about bringing into this process, because I knew that, talking again about space, he just understands that. And I think there's a kind of shockingly little kind of dialogue about what needed to be done in the studio. I knew he would just get it, and that was true.
One of the songs on the new album has the Nirvana referencing name, Load Up on Guns, Bring Your Friends. Does the song itself have anything to do with Smells Like Teen Spirit in any way? I was wondering kind of where the title came from.
I think the way I think about titles is that like making the kind of music I do. I mean, it's non-lyrical, and it's not about text ultimately. But the the process of making this music, it takes time, and there's a lot of time between the recording process and then going through and editing things and whatever, and we're talking months and months and even years sometimes. And of course, through that process, I'm also reading, I'm also watching things, having conversations, and absorbing whatever the hell's going on around me. And so it is inevitably, these things sort of exist in parallel. And I think one of the things that was really, for whatever reason, sort of resonating with me through this period, was going back and actually reading some of Kurt's lyrics, which of course, I sung them all as a teenager. We all did. But I think with time, what's really become clear to me is that he had as a writer, put Nirvana aside for a second and just look at the lyrics. I mean, the poetry, even, if you will. He had an understanding of kind of the world that we live in that I think was maybe a little bit sort of masked, unfortunately, by the thing that was kind of around it, and yeah, I think those lyrics, maybe like the weight has shifted for me, but they still have weight, maybe more so now than ever. And yeah, I just really like, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a bunch of different ways to think about any of the text in the one of the track titles is quoting Siebold, the German writer who has been a huge influence on me. There's other little kind of things I'm pulling on there, and I think part of the joy for me in releasing a record like this into the wild is the idea that somebody out there is I mean, I can't imagine there's too many, but there's going to be somebody out there who's never listened to Smells Like Teen Spirit, or rather they've never really listened, or let alone read it. And I like that idea. I like the idea that, okay, there's this little thread here that maybe someone is going to pick up, and what connection they make between those things is about as arbitrary as the one I made with it, which is, to your point, it's a entirely constructed relationship. I mean, they're not. I haven't sampled Nirvana. I haven't. It's not a cover. It's just me kind of threading the needle a little bit.
There's another song called 1993, and we are roughly the same age. So for me, 1993 was, I was a teenager and, really, really, really getting into music. And, I think there's an argument to be made for, that's the time where music hits you most, when you're that kind of age. And then with the sort of Nirvana reference, I was wondering if that was kind of what you were referencing with 1993, if you were looking back to yourself as a teenager, and what life was like then.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, I mean, firstly, I'll say you're the first person that's ever asked about any of this. So thanks for that. There is definitely like I would like to think that in some way that the part of the record is about sort of sifting through a sort of a nostalgia of some kind. There is um, there's a part of me that really that feels maybe a sense of loss in, now having kids that are sort of moving into that stage of their life that we're talking about, and seeing the way that they don't seeing the kind of the differential there. There is a way that they're growing up that feels very different to the one that I remember at that age. And specifically in regards to music, I suppose, the lack thereof, or the lack of connection, the lack of, I don't know, the disconnection maybe that I see for my eldest, at least my teenager. I don't know. I think they'll find their way, but it's going to be tougher than I think it was maybe for you and I.
Yeah.
It always felt to me like music was the way that I made friends. It was the way that it was, and that went in both directions. I found music because of friends, and I found friends because of music. But now, there's so many walls between them, and the death of the record store isn't about the physical sale of music. It's about the death of an ecosystem. It's about it's about walking up to the counter to buy the record and handing it over to the grumpy guy behind the counter, and him scolding you and telling you this is just ripping off this thing and you should really listen to that instead, and the band, the posters on the wall looking for a drummer, and must be a Metallica fan, like that. It is a tragedy that has kind of been lost there somewhere. And I suppose I don't want to glorify that too much, but I definitely I want to see something come in its place, and so I don't know, maybe those titles are in some way, it is kind of old man nostalgia, and I'm okay with that.
I'm very much here for that. I mean, I think the thing is interesting about a record shop. What always makes me wonder with my kids is that my parents had a load of, records in their collection, and I used to go and, take them and listen to them. And while I do have a load of records, I don't currently have a record player. So it kind of worries me, well, not worries me, but it's like, well, how will I get my tastes, how the kids even know my tastes? I play music, but that's going to be quite random. I'm not going to play some of the most extreme stuff while we're having dinner. And it doesn't worry me, but it's just like, well, it's maybe a shame. I don't know.
I mean, what fascinates me is the way that, I mean, again, if we're talking about a band like Nirvana, how much that resonates with kids even now, with my kids at least, and how little there is that kind of works on that same level, in a kind of in a modern sense, like I mean, I have a shared playlist with my 13-year-old. She sends me whatever she's listening to, and there's a lot of stuff in there that is as old as I am, and I don't remember that being the case when I was a kid. Like, when I was, 14, 15, I wasn't listening to stuff that my parents were listening to. I think I came back to that much later on. My mother was a massive Kate Bush fan, and I don't recall being interested in Kate Bush when I was 14 or 15. That happened later, and I was like, oh fuck yeah, she knew she knew what she was talking about. But it wasn't in the moment. In the moment, it was like, it was everything I was into. And yeah, I don't know. To me, that speaks more to it's a real estate problem than anything else. Like, how are you gonna have a band if there's nowhere to fucking rehearse them? Like, if everyone's living in 60 square meter apartments because they've been priced out of their neighborhood, then of course that where are the kids gonna make music? I don't know. It's definitely gonna change things for sure.
Talking of inspiration, Talk were a big inspiration on the new album, right?
Yeah.
Again, what is it about them that inspired you?
Oh God, where do you start? I mean, okay. I mean, firstly, like, so I don't know if you know this, but when Talk went into the studio to record Spirit of Eden, and they presented it to the record company, the record label sued them for breach of contract because they basically, their position was in a court of law that they had basically broken the contract by making music that didn't sound like Talk. Now, in my mind, that's something that every musician should aspire to, is to make something that breaks the mind of the guy who runs the label. If you're making something that you're going to be potentially sued for, then I think you're on the right path. Like that Andre 3000 record. I mean, I think that's definitely, that's pulling on the Talk narrative there. So reinvention and this sort of like the phoenix, sort of lighting oneself on fire to rise from the ashes. I think there's something in that narrative. The huge pop band that didn't want to be a pop band anymore, and they just started from scratch. I love that story. I've always loved that story. But then of course then you move into the music itself, and just there's so many aspects to those records that just keep pulling me back in. I mean, I think of my top 5 all-time records, the two, Spirit of Eden and Laughing Stock and Mark Hollis' solo record, are definitely occupying 3 of those spots. Like, and I think it's because of the depths. There's an endless depth to the records. Every time you listen to them, I hear something new. There's Phil Brown, the engineer, the producer who worked with Mark Hollis, he wrote a book about those recordings, which I've read. I and many of my peers have read sort of cover to cover many times. And this idea of bringing collaborators into a space, where you have the basic construction of music. There's a sort of a framework for an idea of a song or a piece of music, and you're bringing people into it and inviting them to sort of respond to it, but not showing them all of the parts. Like, just saying, okay, this is actually, it's only this, it's only this thing, like muting everything else, and then having them respond to that, and then you know, and then doing it again, but going, okay, actually, no, it's only this. And then sort of changing what it is they're responding to. And of course, then inevitably they leave, and you're left with these multiple takes that are all referencing the same idea, but the responses are all wildly different, and they're kind of coming at it from different angles. And it's such a simple but such a powerful idea of how to color, like how to color a record, how to give depth to a thing. And then of course, the next step of it is then going through all that, and you have Mark and Phil Brown that they're sort of going through all these takes and grabbing this little phrase from take 1 and this little phrase from take 3 and this little phrase from take 5, and then stitching those together. And then you and I listen to it as an audience, and we're hearing this melody. We're hearing this, we're watching this shape that actually doesn't exist at all. Like it feels like this unified thing, but it's actually, if you were to sort of look at it from the other angle, it's that there's no connection at all between those things. We're making those connections, on our end. And I think that for me, again, going back to this idea of like the spaces between things, I've always been of the mind that audiences are way smarter than they're given credit for, and making the gap between things wider, maybe in a literal sense sometimes, but also in a sort of a philosophical sense, like making the spaces wider is asking more of the audience. But the more they're drawn into it, the more we're pulled into it, and we're asked to make sense of it ourselves, the more connection, I don't know, I feel with music. The more demanding it is, and the more it allows me to be a part of it, the more I love it, I guess.
But it's also a very modern way of making music, isn't it? Rather than recording a band playing their live set, it's like, bringing in parts from other places, as you say, something that never really existed. It's not like a recording of something that actually happened,
Yeah. No, I mean, there's definitely the sort of using the studio as an instrument. I mean, obviously that speaks to me, and yeah, I think there's a kind of a wealth of knowledge to be sort of taken from. I mean, that was such a crazy era, like the early 90s. Like if you think about the early 90s from a production point of view, I mean, in the same breath as you have Talk, you have something also like the Black Album by Metallica, which is really the zenith point of like analog sound production. You've got a $2 million budget to make an album, but they're still recording on tape. Like Pro Tools exists, but just barely. Like they're still kind of just messing around with it a little bit. So, but at the same time, it's like Pro Tools level production. So you got like Lars Ulrich sitting in there, like, editing, not drum takes, but like editing drums, like this fucking snare hit, like, okay, we need to replace that one with another one, but they're working on a 2-inch tape machine. So it's like, okay, we're going to slice out this thing the way you would in Pro Tools now, the way you would in any kind of, DAW today, but they're doing it with a razor blade, and it's like just the amount of, financial resources behind those kinds of decisions. I mean, it's wild to think about, and so like all of that happened in that same period. You got Mark Hollis and Phil Brown and Talk going into the studio and staying there for a fucking year, like a year. Like they just move in, it's the same period as Loveless was made, just studio as a not even as a workspace, but almost like like it's like a living space, you know?
Yeah.
People moved in. It was a wild time for music.
I wondered if I might ask something about Dark. I know it's got nothing to do with
Sure.
with the new album, but as I'm sure I explained before, I'm such a vast fan of Dark. I generally think it's one of the best TV series ever produced, and your soundtrack work to it is astounding.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
The last time we spoke, season 3 had yet to film.
Mhm.
I don't think you'd done the music yet, if I remember. And I was just wondering that obviously the final season, without giving any spoilers, ratchets up the complexity. I mean, by an extreme level.
Yeah.
And I wondered if that made your job a lot more complex, because again, without giving to, like, characters in Dark have their own themes, and then you get other versions of those characters. Again, without giving it away, it just seems like, I mean, it cost it for me to understand what was happening was quite big. I mean, like, was that hard for you?
I mean, yeah, it was hard, but like, I love that. I love it when it's hard. This idea of like the sort of like the alternate versions of some of these characters. It was some of these, ideas, these narrative ideas. I mean, they just went straight into the music. So, okay, well, we got a version of, Marta, who is now actually in place of Jonas in this other weird reality. So let's just take the theme I wrote for Jonas, and instead of recording it with strings, I'm going to put together a brass band in Poland, and we're just going to record it using the exact same sheets of music, and the thing that was played on a violin is now going to be on an oboe, and let's just see how far that gets us, like just basically do exactly the same thing, but with completely different circumstances, and see if that fits. And more often than not, it worked, because the storytelling is so strong and the logic is so sound within the writing that it really allowed me as the composer to kind of just lean into that logic and go, okay, well, if it works, if I know where that's going, then I'm just gonna go with that, and trust in the resolution of those ideas, as it sort of culminates. And no, I mean, it was an amazing ride to be a part of that, and to sort of see the way that, because I think in some ways a big part of my job in that project was perhaps to allow the music to, if only subconsciously, be something that you could sort of lean into, you could trust the music in a way, because I think there's a lot of twists and turns in the storytelling, and a lot of things that feel like they're pulling you one direction, but they're actually going in another one. But if you actually go back and listen to the score in hindsight, mostly I would say that the score is always kind of giving you the truth, like from the outset. It's like, and I kind of felt like that was an important thing, especially with such a complicated narrative. So, yeah.
Did you ever have to go to the creators and go, this is what I think is happening? Is that what is actually happening?
One of the great like privileges of working on something like this is being able to sit with the creator of the show, the creator of the story, Yantia, who's the writer, being able to sort of sit with her and say, hey, like, explain this to me, like explain this to me like I'm 5, like what happens now, so we're here, and then he's going to do what, and then okay, and then what happens, and really just have her sort of walk me through it, and just ask questions and say, so like, who is she to you? What, like, how do you want me to feel about this person? Like, what does this really mean? Like, what is this thing about for you? And being able to sort of get inside the head of, of the real creator behind the thing. It's a really thrilling conversation, and it definitely feeds the work 100%.
I should say I also loved 1899, and I really hope that that can come back in some scope. And again, the score was excellent. But I've taken up far too much of your time. I really appreciate it. Scope Neglect is out. I think when is it out? I did have a date somewhere.
First of March, I think.
1st of March.
That's what I was told.
Cool. Well, it's an excellent album.
Thanks, mate.
And thank you so much for speaking to us today. And
yeah, of course.
Yeah, have a good rest of the day.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for the time. Okay, take care. Bye.
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 You're listening to Radio Primavera Sound, proudly presented by Cupra.